of LaPenta. This is WICR.
Hello, Iona College. Welcome back to the Sports Vault. Jersey Joe and Big Shot Rob here, as always. And Big Shot Rob, we missed you last week, so very happy to have you back on the show with us.
Oh, thanks, Joe. I really missed it last week, and I'm so happy to be back.
Of course. Now, generally, Rob, we don't start off with college football as our first segment, but you know what? I've said it a couple times when we've been on. This season for college football has just been remarkable. I mean, you talk about the last couple years for college football, the momentum it's been gaining. I've actually enjoyed it more than the NFL the last couple years, I've got to be honest. So we're starting off with college football today. The last 3 weekends have just been unbelievable. I mean, the changes in the rankings week to week, we have huge games every weekend now where ranked teams are playing one another. The rankings are changing. So let's go over the top 10 first, go over the top 10 teams, analysis, everything you need to know. Now, number 1, you have Mississippi State staying at number 1, 6-0. They had a bye this past weekend, and I'm a big fan of Mississippi State right now. Outstanding defense. I like their quarterback a lot, Dak Prescott. Didn't have his best game last weekend against Auburn, but he's got a bye week to regather himself. Dak Prescott is playing very well, and they're very well head coached under Dan Mullen. And for people who don't know as much about Dan Mullen's been a winner wherever he's ever been. He's been Urban Meyer's right-hand man at Utah. He was Urban Meyer's right-hand man at Florida. Everywhere he's ever been, he's been a winner, and he's continuing that trend with Mississippi State. Their next games are very winnable. They play Kentucky, they play Arkansas, and then they play UT Martin. Nobody even knows what a UT Martin is. That's going to be like a 66-0 win right there. But I like them to win those 3 games. Their really tough game coming up where they might lose is against Alabama. But we're going to get to Alabama in a minute. They're ranked number 4. I think Mississippi State legit has a chance to run the table and go undefeated. Now, the thing that I'm really hoping for, Rob, and you can comment on this, if we could very possibly have an undefeated Mississippi State playing undefeated Ole Miss in rivalry week, the final week of the season, just how exciting would that be? You have both these undefeated teams rivalry week. It would be unbelievable.
Joe, that would be like one of the best games we would watch in college football. These 2 teams have been lighting it up the last couple weeks, Ole Miss and Mississippi State, and to see them playing together in the last week, especially last week, if you win that last game, that's killer. If you lose, you could knock yourself right out of the rankings. That would be just such an amazing thing, and we know how live that crowd would be over there.
It really is. It's really nice to see for Mississippi State because for a while they've had a rough time. So I've really enjoyed watching this team playing. Just defensively, they're just unbelievable. Let's go now to number 2, Florida State. Now, aside from Florida State, the top 5 is dominated by SEC teams. 4 of the 5 are all SEC teams, and I am not a big fan of Florida State. Me and Rob and I were listening to Colin Coward before we were coming in doing our show prep. Colin is not a fan of Florida State, and neither am I. I mean, you look at them, they're 7-0. They beat Notre Dame in that thrilling game, 31-27. But Florida State, they're going to go undefeated now in the regular season. They just don't have any competition left. Notre Dame is the hardest game on the schedule left. They play Louisville, Virginia, Miami, Boston College, and Florida. Florida, we'll get to. I got to bury Florida. But, I mean, those teams, they will roll over all those teams. The main thing I see with Florida State, though, is this is not as good a team as they were last year. We've said it all along. They didn't have a dominant performance where you were reminded they're the defending champions. They really just haven't had that performance yet, and that continued against Notre Dame. Jameis Winston's the reason why Florida State won that game. You looked at Notre Dame, they pushed Florida State around. They pushed them around defensively. They out physically matched Florida State. And you're telling me that Florida State is going to get pushed around by Notre Dame and they're going to go in and beat a team like Mississippi State or Auburn in the playoff? Not going to happen. If Florida State has trouble physically against Notre Dame, it's going to be a long day against an SEC defense. And you saw it last year in the championship game. Florida State just rolled over everybody when they finally play Auburn. And let's remember, Auburn had the worst SEC-ranked defense last year. They were one of the worst SEC defenses, but they sure looked pretty darn good against Florida State in the championship game last year. I just think at the end of the day, FSU is not going to be able to beat an SEC team, and I'm just not as big a fan as Florida State. But Rob, you watched the game as well. What do you think of Florida State being ranked number 2 right now?
Joe, I'm still not sold on them being number 2. I put them maybe 5, Joe. Yes, I understand the whole undefeated record, but as I saw from last year, Florida State dominated last year. Dominated every single team they played. Jameis Winston was on a totally different level. Yes, you know what, versus Notre Dame, Joe? He played probably one of his best games that we've seen from him all year. But I'm still not sold on this team, and I'm not sold on all his playing throughout this year. And I really don't like them as a number 2 ranked team. They're really going to struggle. If they have to play a team come to playoffs like Ole Miss, Alabama, Mississippi State, you are in deep trouble, Joe.
Absolutely, and I want to ask you this as well. I mean, we're going to get to Notre Dame in a minute. I mean, they're the number 7th ranked team now, Notre Dame. But let's say, Rob, that Notre Dame finished the season with this one loss. I mean, is there such a thing as a good loss? I mean, Notre Dame, let's be honest, they should have won that game. That bad call at the end, Notre Dame really should have won that game. Let's say Florida State finishes the season. I mean, they play Louisville, Virginia, Miami, Boston College, and Florida. Notre Dame's had some impressive wins so far, and they still have to go on the road at Arizona State, and they go at USC. If Notre Dame's only loss of the season is to Florida State at home when they clearly looked like the better team, what do you do?
It's a tough one, Joe. It's like you accept it as, yes, that was a hard-fought loss, but it was a game that was taken from them.
Yeah, that's a fair
It was taken
point
by them. The refs took it away. It wasn't offensive interference. It was taken from them. And you look at it, and yes, you know what? Yes, it's a tough loss to Florida State, but it's a game they should have had.
Absolutely. Let's move on then to number 3, Ole Miss. Ole Miss is 7-0, beat Tennessee 34-3. You give Ole Miss just a ton of credit. The funny thing about both Mississippi teams is they're built very, very similarly. I mean, you look at these teams, both tremendous defensively. You look at Mississippi, Ole Miss, they're the first overall in points against, 10.6. That defense is just, I mean, you think Mississippi State's defense is good, go watch Ole Miss. I mean, very, very good. I mean, very possible that they'll be undefeated when they face Mississippi State. They're going to play this week at LSU. LSU's not as good as we thought a couple weeks ago, so I think they'll have a pretty good game there. I think they'll easily beat LSU. But then they play Auburn. They get Auburn at home, which helps. I mean, I think Auburn is always going to present a challenge, but when you have Auburn at home, that should really help them out. But Ole Miss and Mississippi State, tremendous defensively on both sides of the ball. They have good offenses, Bo Wallace and Dak Prescott. Both head coaches are good. I mean, it's funny because both Mississippi teams really are built the same way. But at the end of the day, we could really see both teams in the playoff, but they both play each other rivalry week, so somebody's got to lose eventually, and we'll see how it happens there. But let's go on to Alabama, and Rob, I don't know how to describe their win on Saturday. They're 6-1 now. I mean, dismantled, destroyed, demolished, embarrassed, 59-0 against Texas A&M. Just, man, a couple weeks ago, where did we think A&M was? And now A&M is just completely on a different level. Just, I don't know how to describe the win.
3 straight losses.
Unbelievable.
I don't know. And Joe, you know how on a high horse I was about Texas A&M supporting them. And just to get crushed 59-0, you don't lose that bad to a ranked team like this.
You don't. You really don't.
This just shows that they really aren't for it for the top 25.
And here's the thing, I mean, we know how good Alabama is, how good they always are. Well coached. Nick Saban is the best. But Alabama's not as good as as you would think from watching that game. I mean, the thing that you really look at for Alabama is when this offense goes up tempo and they just lay Blake Sims. For people who don't know, Blake Sims is Alabama's quarterback. They're just at a completely different level. I mean, when you let Blake Sims just play with his instincts, he's so much of a better quarterback. He's so much more comfortable in the pocket making plays. So Blake Sims, they go up tempo. That offense is so much better. Defensively, they're sound as always. 3rd overall in points against, 13.1. I mean, to be honest, I think they're going to lose the second game. They play November 15th against Mississippi State. They play November 29th, rivalry week, against Auburn. They're not beating both those teams. They might beat one of them, but I think a second loss could potentially knock them out of the playoff. I don't know if that's going to be true because a lot of these top teams have a lot of tough games coming up, but it's very hard for me to see Alabama not losing a second game. But Rob, what do you think of Alabama's final stretch? What have you seen?
I think Alabama, they're going to lose one, Joe, out of those two games that you mentioned, and I think the loss is going to be versus Mississippi State. I just don't see them getting past that defense.
I agree. I mean, I just think offensively, Blake Sims is getting better. Up-tempo, though, that defense, I mean, I said it last week when you weren't here. That was the best performance I've ever seen against Gus Malzahn's offense. I've never seen a defense come in with a game plan and execute it so well and stop Gus Malzahn's Auburn Tigers. Last year, Missouri's defense was incredible. Auburn scored 40 points against that defense. I haven't seen it done, and I did see it finally from Mississippi State. It's going to be a good game. And speaking of Auburn, let's go on to the Auburn Tigers. Number 5, I actually like them more than Alabama. I would probably put them 4 in my personal rankings. But they're 5-1. They had a bye this week. I love Auburn, though. So I think you look at them, they have a pretty tough upcoming schedule. They're probably going to end up with a second loss as well, but October 25th, South Carolina, November 1st, Ole Miss, November 8th, A&M, and November 15th, Georgia, then Bama, November 29th. Now, South Carolina coming off the bye, that's a win. November 1st, Ole Miss, going to be a very tough game there. They could lose that game. A&M, well, they lost 59-0 to Alabama. I think we know how that's going to go. And then Bama, November 29th, rivalry week. Should be a very exciting game there, but I think you're probably going to give Auburn an edge there as well. But the thing I like about Auburn, even with this schedule, is they're better everywhere than they were last year. They're better defensively than they were last year. They're 13th in points against. They're better offensively. They're so much more versatile this year than they were last year. Last year, Nick Marshall, I mean, I've given him so much credit because he really has improved. I mean, this offense was so one-dimensional. When they had to throw the ball, they were in such a bad position. But Nick Marshall's comfortable throwing the ball now. I really like the way he's progressed, and I hope Auburn gets into the playoff because they're an exciting offense. I mean, I want the Oregons, I want the Auburns, I want these up-tempo offenses in because they just provide a good watch.
Yeah, most definitely. Joe, especially last year with Auburn, I love watching that game last year versus Florida State, and they show so much. The team is amazing. They had such an amazing rushing game last year, and they just keep improving. And you know what? I see them going far this year. I see them maybe losing. The only team I could see them really losing to, I think, is Ole Miss on the rest of their schedule.
I agree. I think that's going to be a really tough game there, but I'm so excited to watch that one. Let's go on to the Oregon Ducks at 6-1, beat the Washington Huskies 45-20 this week. Oregon really came back in the conversation with their 2 strong games in a row against UCLA and now Washington. Next 3 games are interesting for Oregon. They play California, Stanford, and Utah. Now, I think California, the one thing about Stanford is interesting because Stanford is not as good this year as last year, as the last couple, but Stanford has been the crux for Oregon the last couple years. That's been the team where Oregon has really hit that wall. It's been that week where they struggled, and I think you look at them, this could be definitely a tough game for them because their offensive line struggles. Defensively, they struggle. I mean, I've got the stats right here. They're 48th in points against, which is not very good. Their offensive line has its problems. But Marcus Mariota, it's all the more reason why I think he's my Heisman favorite. He's been so good this year. 19 touchdowns, 1,957 yards, 0 interceptions. Marcus Mariota, with the problems he's had on the offensive line, with their problems defensively, has had such a good year. And I really think Oregon has a chance here because the top-heavy teams, someone's going to lose some more games eventually. They're definitely on the outside looking in, but Oregon, if they can continue, if they get past Stanford, I think they have a legit chance to make the playoff.
I most definitely do, Joe. For Oregon to continue to win, Marcus Mariota is going to have to lead this team. First of all, this is the year he wins the Heisman Trophy, Joe. The guy is just putting up amazing numbers. But the thing I'm seeing is the offensive line needs to protect him. He's been sacked 18 times this year, Joe. Last year in 2013, he was sacked 18 times. 2012, 17 times he was sacked. And in order for them to continue to win, they must protect Mariota because Mariota is carrying this team this year.
I agree with you. I completely agree with you there. Marcus Mariota has been the huge name. It makes it kind of interesting. I'm kind of going off topic of the schedule here, Rob, but what do you think of Marcus Mariota as a potential NFL player? I mean, there's Oregon quarterbacks are so hard to translate to the NFL because no one runs a pure offense like that, and their offense is so based on the running game and spacing and deception, and you just can't run that in the NFL. I like Mariota a lot. I think he's a smart kid, but I just don't know if I see him as a franchise quarterback in the NFL.
You know, that's a really tough one, Joe, because I'm really sold on him. I totally understand with Oregon's offense, because Oregon's offense is all rush, totally getting you off guard. But I could see Mariota really being really effective if he comes to the NFL. I think like he'd be very helpful for a team like the Titans or Jets, and I could see him going in the first round.
Ooh, your New York Jets might take Marcus Mariota. That would be kind of cool.
If Geno can't fix it this year.
Yeah, if Geno can't. He's got his new weapon, Percy Harvin, now.
Yeah, and he had a good game last week, so I'm not going to count him out yet.
There we go. Well, we'll get to NFL in a while. Before we end the first segment, though, let's go to Notre Dame. When we come back, we'll finish the top 10. But number 7, Notre Dame, 6-1, lost to Florida State 31-27. And the thing is, I mean, it's not a bad loss because Notre Dame clearly was the more physical team in this game. They were the more dominant team. I mean, the thing that's amazing to me is Notre Dame was the 69th ranked rushing team in the nation heading into that game. You wouldn't have known that by watching that game. They ran the ball extremely well. Everett Golson played a very good game. Everett Golson, I mean, I think he has a chance in the Heisman here too, aside from Marcus Mariota. His only problem has been turnovers, but at 19 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 1,996 yards. Everett Golson's had a tremendous year as well. But you look at Notre Dame, the running game is picking up since that game. Everett Golson, the turnover, but Notre Dame looked like the real team. I think we were all wondering this week, are they for real or not? And we saw them dominate against Florida State, physically dominate them. I think Notre Dame's legit, 100%. And at the end of the day, if they finish, I mean, look at the rest of their schedule. November 8th at Arizona State. That's a very tough game. November 29th at USC. 2 very tough games, but they have a very good chance to win both those. Those are both extremely winnable games. If they win them both and their only losses against Florida State, I'm very, very much considering putting Notre Dame in my playoff. I am over Florida State because they dominated them in that game.
Yeah, most definitely, Joe. I see them finishing undefeated the rest of the year. Yes, they had their one loss versus Florida State, but I see them beating Arizona State and USC, and I really have a hard case for them for the playoffs. I could see them finishing number 4.
Excellent. Well, really good thoughts on the first 7. We're going to come back, finish off the top 10, talk a little bit of other teams that we want to get into. We'll move into some baseball, some football, so stay with us, and we will be right back.